into the meat of the session, which is going to be, well, we did release our insight report a couple of weeks ago, and actually we discussed it on a session 2 weeks ago in a bit of detail. So we are going to be looking for the different awarding bodies to just give their feedback and views from the insight report. But Hazel, one of my colleagues, and Martin, who worked together very closely on a survey that we performed last week. So I know a lot of people on the call actually helped us with that survey. So I'm now going to hand over to Hazel, where she has got some results for us.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Gareth. And as Gareth said, we'll look to kind of intertwine and seek the views from the awarding bodies on the insight report and the survey results throughout. But I think it's fair to say at first it's really pleasing response we saw from employers to our survey. So thanks to everyone on the forum today who contributed. We had responses from over 160 employers, and everybody really well represented different sectors, different locations, and different sizes of organisations, so a good kind of range of views coming through. And we structured the questions within our survey around the kind of key areas of our earlier insight report to see if we could build on what we thought employers should be considering, and then draw out any further insights into what employers are actually doing around areas such as recruitment, training and development, and retention to manage the impacts of the current crisis.
I might chip in at this stage and say, please feel free, as we're working through the sort of next 30 or 40 minutes, if anyone has any specific kind of comments or questions, feel free to chip in verbally, but there is the chat box at the bottom. One of our other colleagues, Dave, is going to be sort of monitoring the chat box just to make sure we can try and introduce any kind of comments from anyone on the call into that. So we're going to kind of work on it in themes, considering two things: the insight report that we produced a couple of weeks ago, and then the results of the survey. And actually, before I let Hazel get stuck into the kind of feedback from the survey, if we just start with a sort of first broad theme of recruitment, obviously something that a lot of people are going to be thinking about in a bit of detail, I would like to just get the kind of feedback from the different awarding bodies around the recruitment section that we had in our insight report first. So perhaps if I can turn to the AAT maybe to start off with, if Andrew or Anthony got any sort of insights or comments on what was raised in the reports.
Thank you, Gareth. I think from our perspective, I guess no surprises. It's certainly what we're hearing in the market too. I think uncertainty is the key to all of this. I think what I would say is I think what we're seeing in terms of a response throughout, but maybe particularly in the recruitment side of the game, is what you might call proactive or even pragmatic financial planning. It's not panic. And I think that's a key message throughout for us, because it points us at some things that we clearly all have to do. It points us to we have to work together rather than individually. But the key for me, and the key that we have around the management table at AAT right now at the moment, in fact I'm coming off this call and going straight into one with our guys, is trying to get a grip on the new normal. Because what we're looking for, in my opinion, on recruitment will go away very quickly. I'm in the same place as your opening comments while people were coming in, Gareth, around your conversations with the Bank of England. Yep, we're going down, and we're going down fast. But actually this will come back. But what will it come back to? Will it come back to where we are today, or are we looking at a new level? Are we looking at something different? And I think we'll happily share that as we go through our thinking. But for me, around recruitment, no surprises. Why wouldn't you respond in the way that employers are? They're responding to us in the same way as they're responding to you. The issues are very clear. The risks are very clear. So I think we just have to get a little bit further into this before we link arms and jump off the cliff together.
Gareth, you're on mute, I think.
Apologies. Hopefully I'm back now. So thank you very much, Andrew. So if we can maybe turn now, maybe the ACCA, maybe Gemma or Jenny.
I was going to hand over to Clive actually, because he's from our professional insights team.
Fantastic. Welcome, Clive.
Hello, welcome everybody. Thank you. I suppose a couple of thoughts just to add on to what's been said. I think the reality is, yes, we don't know, but as somebody categorized it to me the other day, we've probably gone through the biggest social experiment that nobody dared to do, and we proved the hypothesis that we can do it. So I think what that means is going forwards, we will see a lot more flexibility in terms of roles, in terms of recruitment, in terms of ways of working. And absolutely right, yes, that's got to work through. In terms of what we're seeing in job postings, yes, we get that message, absolutely, but that's what you would expect at the sort of the knee jerk. And I think there will be signs coming up. We're seeing that from economies that are already on the outbound, if you like, on the recovery. If we look at our job board statistics, Poland, India, Hong Kong are all seeing substantial amounts of recruitment bouncing back very quickly. And I think that gives us a positive sign. Yes, whilst the live roles are down, they're actually quite healthy on our job board. So I think there are signs of positivity and signs of optimism here, not just, you know, a panic.
Fantastic. Actually, you know, just my own insight, Clive, that employers I've talked to in the last couple of weeks, I've had a number of employers reference what happened after the 2008-9 financial crash, that a lot of employers cut back recruitment dramatically, and then 4 or 5 years later really regretted it because they then lacked a whole generation of kind of newly qualified senior staff. And I've had a few employers saying, actually, we do not want to repeat that mistake. So I've been quite impressed with the level of confidence in recruitment.
Yeah. And I think that we're hearing the same, and I think that's absolutely sensible point, that, you know, if you cut too far, if you knee-jerk too quickly, especially because this will be, we suspect from what you said, Gareth, earlier on, a faster climb out, then knee-jerk at this point it is not sensible, and we don't want to waste the generation. Absolutely.
I've heard of a lot of talk of a V rather than a U, so it'll be quick in but relatively quick out. What about the ICW, Fiona?
Yeah, so the very large firms, they always do recruitment early in the process, so they have got a lot of offers out and a lot of offers accepted, but as we all know, the canny students accept multiple offers and often decline last minute, so that's a risk to them. For some of them, they've got remote recruitment type activity that they can carry on trying to recruit people in, which is good. From our insight, it looks like kind of the top 20, top 30 firms down from that are the ones that are being most pessimistic about their intake for 2020 and predicting the largest drop, although a lot of them are being positive, as everyone said, and probably moving a lot of the start dates to January or later in 2020. And then, yeah, the smaller firms, I think generally it's much more of an unknown. First of all, they need to see how many of their clients still exist in a few months and what the workload's likely to be. But I thoroughly endorse that last comment about not making too large a knee-jerk reaction, because, yeah, the firms that all cut recruitment last time definitely regretted it a few years later when there's a massive shortage of seniors. So generally, I think everyone's trying to remain positive, trying to keep on track. Certainly, I've spoken to firms who are planning inductions for when they start and trying to work out how they engage with their brand new employees if they can't physically be with them. So a lot of work's going into that. And I had a call with a client just before this webinar where she was talking about they're thinking of changing the exam pathway to front load certificate level exams so the students get their technical knowledge early, and then when hopefully we return a bit more to normal and people can be in the office and out at client premises, then they've got the technical knowledge under their belt. But it's harder to do that in the short term to get them, you know, work ready in a work environment. So yeah, a lot of people making lots of really useful and sensible plans, really.
Great, thanks, Fiona. And obviously, you know, that's going to be fairly sort of practice firm kind of focused on the Trevor, SEMA, and you know, are you seeing anything particular in the sort of business world?
I guess no surprises really from what we've seen, and certainly what your survey is showing a report there as well. We're expecting and seeing some fall off in certain industries, but an increase in others. I guess the speed of economic recovery is going to be crucial here, and I think both employers and graduates need to be flexible moving forward.
Fantastic, thank you. So Hazel, what about our survey? What did we find out from the many employers that filled it in?
Yeah, I mean, so looking at the kind of survey responses to the topic around recruitment, I think what we found most concerning was almost half of the respondents to our survey have paused recruitment activity altogether, and that ranged from reasons being due to social distancing restrictions still being in place, or just general uncertainty around the number of people they want to recruit this year. And that uncertainty goes from 2020 intakes into 2021. So with 30% unsure of how many people they want to completely take on this year, but also almost half being unsure over the next kind of 12 to 18 months as well. So still a lot of uncertainty, needless to say, around that. But also I think for, you know, 20%, well, sorry, with 25% of expecting a decrease in numbers overall for intakes this year, it does seem that for those that are willing and able to recruit, there is a strong pool of talent available, as we kind of suspected from our earlier insight report. I think one of the other surprises we saw was the number of employers not planning to increase the frequency of their intakes too. Whereas if it makes sense, if you are uncertain about your overall resourcing requirements, to actually consider staggering intakes or making provision for additional intakes later in the year and early in 2021 to actually manage and respond to the resource that you need in the business to manage that uncertainty around overall numbers.
Yeah, no, fantastic. Thank you, Hazel. I mean, obviously some concerning results, probably not particularly surprising given the uncertainty that is, you know, still very much a feature of the environment. If I can ask the awarding bodies in terms of the knock-on effect for them, if a quarter of organisations do reduce intakes, you know, what sort of changes will need to be made? So Fiona, maybe from the ICAW's perspective.
Yeah, it's a worry, obviously. If we get far fewer students than we planned to get in 2020, it affects the whole budget for the Institute. And I don't think it's a secret that we are planning quite a significant deficit this year. And we think that will have a significant impact on 2021 again. So it does restrict what we can do, and I know that many clients have asked if we can set up new exam sessions, for example, where we've had to delay or cancel exam sittings. Could we, for example, have another advanced level maybe early in 2021? The cost of that is prohibitive, so we can't. So yes, it is having a knock-on effect of what in an ideal world we would like to provide. So yeah, I mean, yes, we'll keep going. The Institute's very, very healthy. We've got plenty of reserves. Don't want anyone to worry that we're cash strapped and we're going to go under. We're really not. But yeah, with the reduction in income coming in, it obviously does restrict what we're able to do in the future. But we've got lots of exciting things planned anyway.
And I know, I mean, the ICAW have had record intakes for five years in a row, I think. So, you know, yeah, it's been a very good few years. It would have been hard probably to maintain that growth even at the best of times. What about ways of sort of helping to support employers with the challenges they're facing on recruitment? What would you say from that respect?
Yeah, so we've got the training vacancies portal, which most of our employers are at least aware of, if not already advertising their vacancies. So that's the first port of call. So employers have control over their own postings, and we promote that to all of our potential student population. So through all of the activities that our student recruitment undertake, that's a very well advertised portal, and many firms rely purely on that. They get more than enough applicants through that. With qualified staff, we've got the jobs portal, ICAW jobs portal, which is again free for ICAW member firms. So yeah, advertise freely. And our student recruitment team always encourage employers to take part in our activities. So yeah, traditionally they've been mainly face-to-face, but we're looking at more and more virtual student recruitment activity. And we always like to have employers on board with us, because that's who the students actually want to talk to, not the institute who doesn't employ them, but potential employers.
Great, thanks, Fiona. And so what about CIMA? So Trevor, again, around recruitment, you know, how will that sort of potential reduction impact on CIMA? And actually, what can then CIMA be doing to help employers?
Well, I think we do have to take on board the size and scope of the survey, but it certainly does suggest there is going to be some disruption to recruitment. Having said that, in previous years and in similar circumstances, actually we've seen an increase in some cases of people studying, purely because if the employer won't pay for them, they'll tend to do it privately for obvious reasons, especially where employment is concerned. In terms of employee support, we have a lot of guidance and advice on the CIMA website. We also have obviously the CIMA jobs and career portal. So I'd encourage anybody that is able to have a look on the website. I'll send the link later. As I said, there's a lot of information there. Do have a read.
Fantastic, thank you. And actually with ACCA, because I think ACCA does sort of sit across both practice and industry, do you see any sort of significant differences between those two sort of sectors?
I think from our perspective, what we've been looking at is ways in which we can support all of our students, regardless of which sector that they are working in, alongside, as the other bodies have been doing, looking at the job board. We've been focusing on how we can actually enhance it. We've got a very large specialist job board, and you know, it's been up and running for some time, but actually what we wanted to do is make sure that our students have the most opportunity for employment if there is reduced opportunity in recruitment. So we've been enhancing the careers advice that we've put onto the board, and also we've already been running a number of virtual fairs around the world, and it will be coming to the UK this year too. But I think also it's about making sure that what we're offering in terms of the qualification, it ensures that our students and our members have the most relevant skills for the jobs that are available. So making sure that we really enhance the qualification, we keep it really up to date, really modern, is also one way in which we can support. I don't know if Clive and Gemma have anything to add.
Nope. I think that's probably a fair summary.
Thank you.
Fantastic. No, thank you, Jenny. And then Andrew, I mean, obviously the AAT, potentially looking at quite a different, you know, demographic. You know, it's one of the trends I've seen in the last sort of 5 years. There's a huge increase in the kind of proportion of school leavers that a lot of organisations take on, and then using, you know, AAT very much as a springboard into other qualifications. What are your views as in terms of those recruitment issues?
I think first up, I'd agree with everything that everybody else has thrown in. Not quite sure whether this is recruitment or more training and development, but I'll put it in anyway. You know, the only experience we've got of this is 2008, 2009, and a recession and the panic that went with that. Our student numbers went up, only by sort of single digit, but and the trend over the sort of following 4 or 5 years was 2 and 3% a year going up, and it was all UK based, which is good. In parallel to that, we have seen over the last 3 weeks, I haven't had this week's yet, apologies, that our prospects, so these are the people who contact us directly and say that we would actually quite like, we're interested, we want information about an AAT qualification, are significantly up year on year. Last week we were 24% up. And I think for me, I don't want to talk about green shoots. I'm only prepared to talk about a light green singular shoot. But there is a bit of hope that there's movement around, and we look at those prospect students against some fairly basic sort of quality measures, and we think they're a higher quality student than ordinarily we would see. So for us, it's really difficult because it's a challenging market that we're in. No two ways about it. Recruitment is going to take a hit. But actually, some of our early signs and some of our experience of recession 10 years ago, 12 years ago, might suggest that we might just hold our own.
Fantastic. And actually, a few employers, I mean, the statistic there around the pausing of recruitment, I wonder to what degree that's actually more a response to just the last 8 weeks has just been a bit chaotic for a lot of organisations.
They physically can't do it.
Yeah, and you know, I know a few employers that I've talked to recently who they are now back on board with their, you know, school leaver recruitment programs. They're doing sort of online interviewing with a database of candidates they had built up prior to the sort of lockdown. And I thought I might, because you know, the other thing that sort of does jump out at me there is that nearly a third of respondents just unsure. So if I can actually, you know, maybe call my colleague Martin, you know, you've been around professional education for a long time. What sort of things can firms do to try and give themselves more clarity, do you think, Martin?
Yes. Well, good afternoon, everybody. I think it's been really interesting to listen to just to pick up on what the Institute's been saying there. I think there's a huge difference between, I guess, job boards at institutes and actually the abilities for an employer to recruit someone. And that's a really important point, that all the job boards around the institutes probably are for individuals, and what we're seeing now, and I've seen go into the chat box there, is actually how do employers select, filter, onboard, make sure they've got the right person in place during this period. And I think that's a series of services that we can all probably think about how we can help employers with. I think as far as your question, Gareth, on the not sures, comes back to one thing we talk an awful lot about, is control what you can control. And I think, you know, right now, everybody involved in recruitment, I think the clear core message is around, you need to be more agile, you need to be more flexible. And so I think what every organisation can control is how their selection is more agile and flexible, how who they're trying to recruit is more agile and flexible, how they onboard is more agile and flexible, how they contract with employees is more agile and flexible, how do you get IT and kit out to people is more agile and flexible. So I think that's the thing. Those are things that firms can do, because I think you're right. The bit around what the business demand will be for, you know, how many actual people, that may change between now and, you know, next month and the month after. But, you know, it would be awful to say, right, I've now got clarity on the number of people we want, and we haven't actually done the bit now, which is make ourselves more agile and flexible in how to select and onboard people. So I think that would be my advice to companies right now, would be make sure, and I'm the survey, loads of people are in this, they've already done that part, but it's all the way through from selection, all the way through to contracting as well. How do you make sure, you know, people might want to extend probationary periods because they think it's harder to find cultural fits right now. So all of that process around the selection and onboarding, I think, needs to be the piece that every organisation should be, you know, doing right now.
Fantastic, thanks, Martin. Okay, well, Hazel, if we move on to the next kind of broad topic, so we're also looking at insights around training and development. Again, if I can go back to the awarding bodies, just in terms of the responses to our insight report, just what sort of quick, sort of key highlights you came across. So maybe if I can go to Clive, actually, at the ACCA to start off with this, around training and development, okay, around sort of study policies.
Yeah, this is an interesting one, and I look back to my experiences of 2008, 2009, and I see, to start with, those organisations that did reduce training budgets too far, too quickly, absolutely regretted it. And there is a thing, I think, and we're seeing this from our interaction with members, our interaction with students, that there is a thirst for education, a thirst for knowledge at this point in time, which is absolutely the right thing to see and do. One thing I did see from the detailed results was that cut in training budgets wasn't as substantial as I would have expected to see. I think people have learned and appreciated this. So it is a good time to reset. It is absolutely a good time to pick up new skills, to use your bodies, you know, the various things that we all offer in terms of education from my side, the professional insights team, of, you know, things you can read, of reports and insights and podcasts that look to the future. That's all a very encouraging thing, and I would encourage employers to take advantage of that, as well as, you know, their employees. And, you know, to some extent, again, let's look at the opportunity. And the opportunity is one of reskilling and digitalization here. And there are lots of things to offer. We've launched a certificate in digital accounting, for example, at the right time. And that's got a lot of traction, exploring all these options with people.
Fantastic. Thank you, Clive. Andrew, AAT perspective on that kind of training development piece?
I think we're in a very similar place. To me, it's all about, I suppose, a number of things, but flexibility. So remote invigilation is here to stay. But I think also supporting training providers in delivering what I might call a blended solution, a more flexible solution, a mix of classroom and online. Social distancing, whether we love it or hate it, and I'm sure we all hate it, is kind of here to stay in some shape or form. So let's not fight it. Let's work with it, work out what it is that we can do. Technology is part of the solution. Again, like the previous comment, so too is the relevance of the product that we've got out in the market. A little bit more practical, maybe. I'm about to kick off within AAT a big look at how we onboard both new students from an AAT perspective, but also working with our bigger training providers. You know, what support can we give you to help onboard? It's not going away, so we've got to work with it. And for me, it's about trying to get ahead of it. And part of that is onboarding and sitting down with a new student and saying, how do we help you? How do we get you moving? Because the times are going to be uncertain in terms of how we deliver the qualification, and we got to work with that.
Fantastic, thanks, Andrew. And Andrew, if a week ago somebody had said that I was going to hear you say remote invigilation is here to stay, I'd have kissed them, and I'd kiss you now if you were with me in the same room.
Do you know what? Do you know what, Gareth? I'm delighted that I'm not.
Trevor, now one of the big things I've seen in terms of sort of study policies around CIMA, one of the big shifts has been for me around apprenticeships, that, you know, CIMA typically didn't have hugely generous study leave in the way that perhaps ICAW students often would, because they work in practice. But obviously apprenticeships and the 20% off the job has actually changed that quite dramatically where CIMA trainees are concerned. Have you got any sort of more immediate insights around the last couple of months on training and development?
I think really it's just a question of carrying on. People have realised they can use the current situation to maybe adjust their off-the-job training, etc., accordingly. So people are applying common sense, but just trying to move forward where they can.
Fantastic. And Fiona from the ICAW?
Well, if I just start with the cutting training budgets, from discussions that myself and the team have had, we don't think the budgets are being slashed for students because they recognise the value in that. I think where the cuts are happening is more post-qualified, which feels more comfortable cutting that type of budget. So just in case people aren't aware, we've made a lot of our training free to our members, or drastically cut the price. And for example, members can join, I think it's about 18 free communities. The academy offerings are often at 50% of the original cost, but that's the plug over. But the positive thing that I think has come out of this is we've all had to step up. We keep talking about remote invigilation. Last year, when we talked to employers about what the ACA should look like as part of our consultation, we talked about remote invigilation, and there was practically no employer that wanted us to go down that road, so we parked it. Now, yeah, it's going to become the new norm, I think. So it's made us all step up very quickly and embrace that. And, you know, things like the webinar today, we didn't use Teams or Zoom or anything just a couple of months ago, and it's keeping us all connected, and the firms are all doing that, the employers are all doing that with their students, having regular catch-ups, Again, the call I had earlier with a client, she says she's getting to know her students much better in these times than she did before, because she's making that effort, they're making that effort, they're being much more open and honest with her than they ever were before. So yeah, the positives as well as downsides at the moment.
Yeah, I was chatting to a big employer in Sheffield a couple of weeks ago, and she was saying actually that she is keeping 2 lists at the moment: the things she's doing that she wants to keep doing after this is over, and the things she's stopped doing that she doesn't want to go back to doing after all this is over. And I'm intrigued to see her lists, actually. I might see if she'll share them. Hazel, back to you in terms of the survey results around training and development.
Sure. Yeah. So I think, I mean, like Clive, at ACCA, we were quite heartened to see that 50% of respondents to the survey weren't intending to reduce their overall L&D kind of spend. But those that did indicate that they do expect to decrease that spend, certainly in the short to medium term, are still considering their options as well, which might demonstrate that there isn't necessarily a one-size-fits-all solution. And as Fiona referenced, it might actually be looking at spends across different groups and seeing how they can manage that and not necessarily impacting directly on accountancy students. But we were surprised to see that only 19% of people who responded were actually making steps to relax study policy rules around progression and things like pathway structure. We expected that to be a much higher number, and I think with 48% saying they're not intending to make certainly any short-term changes to their study policy at all, would indicate that this is still an area that needs looking at, certainly to try and avoid any undue delay to progression and qualification of trainees. So it is worth considering all of the options out there to make sure that people continue to progress and develop.
Brilliant, thank you. And going back to Martin, actually, from a sort of training provider angle, how can training providers like ourselves, like our competitors, help employers to deal with some of these challenges around, maybe if budgets are decreasing and, delays to progression of students?
Well, I think the I guess it's a very topical one, but I guess the key one is working out whether or not apprenticeship programs would work for you and your organisation. We know from the last 2.5 years they don't. There's some organisations who said no, we don't want the sort of the extra regulatory piece that come with it. I think that I imagine will be now getting a second look, Gareth, to be perfectly honest, and actually can we as an organisation, could the organisation deal with those, considering the benefits? I mean, and we would discuss, I'm sure other training providers will as well, we actually think they're a much more robust and fully formed training program probably than just doing the exam only sort of commercial approach. There's obviously then probably the next one is to, if it's not apprenticeship programs, it's to look at the blend of how organisations can train their staff. I mean, the blend's been pushed pretty much straight into remote learning over the last 8 weeks. I imagine a lot of firms will be assessing with their students how well that's been received. I know we're doing lots of surveys on a weekly basis with our students, and it's coming out quite interestingly that probably sort of about half are probably saying they want to go back into centre as soon as they can. About 30% are going, actually, yeah, this whole virtual, I can see how that might blend in now, and about 20% are sort of saying, actually, I'm not sure I would go back into centre. This is all okay. So I think organisations speaking to their students as well about what they would, how they'd like to manage it. I think then it's down to who you're recruiting as well. So down to the individuals that you're recruiting and the qualifications that they're trying to take. Whether you recruit people and actually say, look, we're just going to do, whether it's a CFAB or certificate or an AAT first of all before you move on, and actually not everyone in the intake moves on to say a level 7. Those are other ways that people can manage their budgets over the next sort of 2 or 3 years.
Great, thanks, Martin. And maybe to the awarding bodies, I mean, we've heard the word flexibility a number of times just in the last sort of 3/4 of an hour. And I think this situation has thrown up a lot of rather unique situations of students who have been able to do certain parts but haven't been able to do other things, and things might come out of sync a little bit. So kind of interesting to see what reactions the various institutes have had to you know, things like progression rules, you know, achievement, flexibility. So, you know, Trevor, have you seen, you know, any of these aspects at CIMA in terms of trying to make progression easier with more flexibilities?
Yeah, we have. We've obviously seen a clear relaxation in some areas, certainly with regard to exam policy. But the fact you've got 88% of your respondents are not planning to make a change or a mix of the qualifications has got to be encouraging. In terms of what we can do, obviously the move to online invigilation and online exams is proving tremendously helpful. So it should hopefully help to keep things moving along smoothly.
Fantastic. Clive, ACCA's view?
I think I'm going to defer across to my colleagues on that one, if you don't mind.
Absolutely.
Yeah, sure. I'd probably echo a lot of what Trevor's just said. So there's students obviously at the moment that are having extra study time if being furloughed, for example. So obviously they really want to get on, and it's about offering that flexibility in order for them to get studying and keep studying as well. So obviously we don't know what's going to happen, and I think around the autumn time we're going to see that there might be more flexibility needed as well as people start to return to the workplace potentially. So it's about managing workload with training, and we're there to support the learning providers as well to do that.
Fantastic. And, you know, I've had to educate myself a lot in the last couple of weeks around, so I think we're going to get a lot more students who potentially might be overlapping qualifications. So whereas they would normally say finish their AAT over the summer to start one of the other qualifications, I suspect there may be a little bit more overlapping where students are still knocking off some AAT papers as they're already moving forward. So, you know, it's been really interesting education around the kind of paper for paper exemptions that the likes of the ACCA, ICAW and CIMA give. You don't actually have to have finished your level 4 AAT to necessarily start picking up a few exemptions, which I think just eases that journey. And in fact, you know, Andrew, from your perspective at the AAT, you know, do you have any sort of views on these statistics?
I mean, not really, Gareth. I mean, just to pick up on that point, we're perhaps a little bit further down that path in the sense we're already everything is computer based, and we're already in a situation where we don't need necessarily within the AAT qualifications a student to have finished one level before they can start on the next one. So I think that flexibility does work well, and is clearly part of a solution. I just echo what somebody said earlier. You know, 80%, 88% of respondents not planning to change the mix of qualifications does suggest to me that across all of us, the mix is kind of about right, which has got to be encouraging for the future. If that was 25%, I don't think we'd be sitting here volunteering to be on a webinar with you talking to employers. But that was the one figure that jumped out to me and said, oh, okay, we're okay. We've got to be flexible. We've got to keep moving, but it's about pathways and progression, isn't it?
Yeah, and actually, you know, to me, the bigger hurdle around that progression is the fact that apprenticeships can't overlap. So actually, you know, the remote offering for a level 4 synoptic is, you know, that's great news in terms of that piece. Fiona, ICAW?
Yeah, so as you know, CFAB and the ACA are very flexible anyway. But the one thing that we have put in place this year in the current environment is normally students would have to have attempted the 14 exams, ACA exams, before they attempt case study. But we've relaxed that rule for November. So if students have got behind on their pathway, but the employer still wants them to finish the advanced level in November, then they can do. And this also applies to our students who are on the joint programme with the CTA, because the CIOT had to cancel their exams this summer. So some students won't have sat their tax paper before they want to sit case in November. So that's the relaxation that we put in place now. But yeah, just like AAT said, we don't say that you have to finish one level before you attempt the next.
Yeah, fantastic. And Hazel, I think one more slide we've got as we get towards the end of the session.
Yeah, so finally, just looking at kind of the impacts on current staff, and I think it was interesting to see that the short-term impacts on workload varied considerably, with employers seeing impacts ranging from significant increases to significant decreases. So it didn't seem to be a really clear, this is happening to everybody. It was probably influenced by things like type of client, readiness of client, and the employer to move to remote working. All of those things would have had a factor on the impact in kind of short-term workload. So there's still lots of uncertainty, and that uncertainty again carries through to the second half of this year when employers are looking at more kind of medium-term planning. But I think the other thing is, with the exception of kind of furloughing staff, redeployment into other departments, and things like reviewing holiday policies and when employees can take that holiday, there's been relatively few employers indicate that they are clear on the adjustments that they need to make to their training programs to also help them manage these expected impacts on workloads. So again, that would imply that this is really an area still worthy of attention and something that probably training providers and awarding bodies can help with.
Yeah, I mean, I've talked to a lot of employers, you know, that point around furloughing junior trainees. The impression I get is often it's not necessarily because there isn't the work for them to do. It's actually more around issues with delegating and managing relatively inexperienced staff remotely is actually quite challenging. And to furlough those junior staff then frees up the more senior staff who can work independently to get on with the work that is being required at the moment. So just very briefly, as we go back to the awarding bodies around this issue. So, you know, what are you hearing from employers around what the impact these events are having on their kind of current staff? Perhaps starting with Fiona.
I think all employers are very conscious that their staff may be going through difficult times and worried about their mental health. And from what I've heard, they're really stepping up to support their people, having regular catch-ups, discussing with them and getting them involved in the consultation about work planning, etc., getting ideas from them. And I think that's absolutely key to keep people. As we know, you need them to feel involved, that you need them to feel valued, and you need to be able to explain to them what their potential is. When we've done surveys in the past and asked people why they've moved employers, it's usually because they didn't know what their future held with that employer. So I think where we are today, with more awareness around things like mental health, employers are more aware of that and more aware how they need to support their key members of staff at this time. And yeah, that definitely the discussions that I've been having this week, the people that I'm talking to have made more effort because people are remote than they would have done in the office.
Sure. What about maybe Gemma or Jenny, ACCA?
I might hand over to Clive, actually.
Okay.
I think, Gareth, you hit something that's absolutely fundamental to this, which is that balance between the junior trainees being mentored and coached and the ability to do that and manage the workload. And we know, particularly from our members, particularly in the SMP space, that the workload is very high, it's very flexible, a lot generated by the government initiatives, etc. But I think if we are seeing this as a change in work and work patterns, and it's come through, I've seen a couple of times on the chat in questions as well, somewhere we can't park that issue of mentoring, coaching remotely, onboarding better remotely. And I think that's something that we're all going to have to start really thinking about. Obviously, mental health week next week, rather ironically. There's a lot of attention on that. ACCA has been doing a lot to help its students around that area. It is something I think we've got to build more confidence out on and find ways to cope with.
Fantastic, thank you. I mean, with social distancing, it's probably likely in the short term that office capacities will be dramatically reduced, maybe a third of people in the office than you'd normally have. And I'm hearing some employers are thinking that they'll prioritise office space for junior staff and their immediate mentors, because they're the ones that kind of need to be in a closer proximity, and then the more independently experienced staff can work more remotely. Trevor, maybe final word from you on this.
Yeah, well, I think obviously the furloughing staff situation is going to be continuing for some time. If the economic downturn proves to be more severe than expected, then quite rightly, how do we continue to nurture talent for when the economy recovers? And that may well prove to be the big challenge for everyone.
Fantastic. And maybe a final word from Andrew.
Thank you. Perhaps a slightly left field response as well from us. We've increased the volume of activity that we've pushed out to students, and we've seen a really marked increase in student engagement with what we're putting out. So I think as awarding bodies, we do have a part to play in terms of keeping students, keeping them going. Mental health obviously is an issue for us too. It is for everybody, but it's an uncertain picture. So I think we all have to do our bit.
Fantastic, thank you. Okay, we've heard a lot around you know, these new ways of working. You know, Fiona was talking earlier around sort of remote recruitment, remote inductions, engaging with new staff remotely. You know, Martin was talking about that agility, you know, in selecting and onboarding, even contracting with staff. And just heard there around this idea of trying to build confidence within us all to nurture talent. I've had conversations with a couple of employers in the last week and on the back of the don't know aspects to some of the responses in this report and the lack of clarity, I think, that is felt. And in fact, one of the employers I was chatting to, I think is on the call now, Caroline, but we're looking at putting together, and if I can ask each of you to go to your chat box, and I'm just wanting a yes or a no from employers here. We're thinking about putting together effectively small employer forum groups of say 6 to 8 employers where they can share their concerns, issues, experiences around some of these new ideas. You know, how do you monitor and manage local staff at a remote level? How do you onboard new staff if you can't actually physically meet them? So I'd really appreciate, because you know we're in a good position, I think, to broker some of these sorts of forums, if you could just put a yes or a no in the chat box. And we will, you know, this is just to get a bit of a straw poll of the employers who are here as to whether that's something that would be useful. Because it's something I will probably, myself and some of my colleagues, I can see that I'm joined here by Lucy up in Yorkshire, for instance, and Simon over in Bristol. You know, we will probably start to reach out to employers to see if that's actually something that would be of value to help you navigate the coming months of uncertainty for everyone and just getting used to a lot of new ideas. Well, that brings us pretty much up to the end of time. I think we had a great discussion there today. So I'd just like to thank all of our guests today from the awarding bodies. I won't thank them by name because we've had quite a few of them with us. It'll take me 5 minutes to go through, but really great to have them join us again. Thanks everyone for your input to our survey over the last week or so. As ever, get in touch. I'll drop my email address into the chat box as well. So if anyone's got any questions, any suggestions, anything they want to raise with us, please feel free to do so. Other than that, thank you very much everyone for their input today. Thank you for your attendance and enjoy your weekend, and I'll see all of you soon, hopefully.